Well, hello my friends, welcome back to Milk and Cookies Total War. I'm Mini Pride, and before we jump into the multiplayer action, I do want to make a quick announcement. So today, on the Total War official Twitch channel, Creative Assembly is going to be hosting a tournament called the Surtha Ek Grand Prix at 8 p.m. BST, 3 p.m. EST, and basically it's going to be 4 competitors: Lord Master of Sotek, John Ton of Total Warhammer, the Gobbo King, and myself. And this will all be pre-recorded. It's going to have a lot of cinematic flair. There were some really good games from the tournament, and it's going to be a blast. So if you want to come out and support the multiplayer community, I definitely recommend you head over to the official Twitch channel. All the information will also be linked in the pinned comment and description below. It's going to be a really good time, so please come out, support the multiplayer community. It's not that often that CA actually supports multiplayer tournaments in general. They did it with the Ever Chosen Invitational. They've done it a few other times, but this one's going to be kind of special because it's actually going to be on the front page of UK Twitch. They have a slot opened up there, so there's going to be more viewers, there's going to be more interaction. There might be some other stuff like giveaways. I'm not 100% sure about that, but there's going to be a lot going on, and your boy is in the tournament, so you got to come out and support. So with that out of the way, we are in a head-to-head multiplayer match with Dav Plays. He has a YouTube channel. I will link that in the pinned comment as well. And I am playing as the Dark Elves. He is playing as the Empire. Now, this is a pretty interesting matchup. Dark Elves, obviously one of the strongest multiplayer factions, period. Probably the strongest. They're really good. They probably deserve 1 or 2 nerfs here or there. I don't think they're so incredibly overpowering that there's no way to compete with them, but they're definitely really good. Now, the Empire is one of those factions that was honestly kind of bad when Warhammer 2 first came out, but basically they've gotten a lot of buffs over time and gotten to a point where they're actually quite strong. Now, they take a lot of finesse and a lot of skill to play. So I do not recommend the Empire as a startup faction for you if you're jumping into multiplayer for the first time, but in the hands of a good player, they can absolutely dominate. And I don't think they actually match up particularly horribly versus the Dark Elves. I would say this matchup is maybe a little bit favored towards the Druki, but it's not too bad. And a big reason for that is Missile Cavalry and Heavy Cav in general have really become a staple of the Total War Warhammer 2 multiplayer meta. Stuff like Zintler's Reiksguard, stuff like Reiksguard, Demigryphs Knights, pretty much all the Heavy Cavalry for the Empire gives you some really powerful, killing power. And Missile Cavalry is just a staple of so many builds, whether you're the Dark Elves, Greenskins, Empire, what have you, Pistoliers, Outriders, those kind of things. Certainly Marauder Horsemen have become a huge staple of the meta for both Norska and for Chaos. They just give you a lot of utility, a lot of options, and a lot of ways to dictate the pace of the game. So what's particularly interesting about this matchup, I think, is that there are a lot of mind games. The Empire is typically going to go for a lot of mobility, right? Because they want to push the pace of that engagement. They want to make sure that their best asset, their Heavy Cavalry and their Missile Cavalry, are going to take center stage. So for the Dark Elves, what you're typically going to want to do, I think, one of the best ways to counter what the Empire is trying to do is go Heavy Cavalry builds. Straight up rush your opponent and try to overwhelm them in the cavalry fight. Now, Cold War Knights actually don't trade incredibly well with Reiksguard when they're supported. He's got Balthasar Gelt over on the other side of the field. Stuff like Plague of Rust is really going to turn that heavily in the Reiksguard favor. Cold War Knights aren't amazing. They're not bad cav, and actually for their 1,000 gold price point, they're quite good. But they've got some issues, right? They've got Rampage. They've got a kind of low armor considering their tabletop stats. I would have thought that they'd have more like 110, but honestly, I'm kind of glad they don't, because I think it'd make the faction a little bit even more OP. But one of the best ways to counteract what the Empire is trying to do is make sure that you establish the mobility game for yourself. So investing a lot in cavalry can be really good, and that's why I have 4 Cold War Knights here. 1 out on the flank, 1 directly behind my line to maybe get some charges right up the center, another 1, and then out here we have one of my favorite units in the game, the Knights of the Ebon Claw, the Dreadknight Regiment of Renown that do not rampage and have Murderous Mastery. And they have an absolutely beastly stat line that will mulch through Empire Cavalry and even trade cost effectively with Demigryphs Knights with halberds. So that's why I brought them here. They're not that used. I don't think I see them very often in competitive multiplayer simply because they're so expensive. And if you lose them, you're losing a lot of your damage output and a lot of gold from your army. But look at those stats. 56 melee defense, almost 50 weapon strength, most of that armor piercing. They cause fear. They don't rampage. They're really beastly. So that's why I brought them here. I'm going to try to overwhelm the cavalry fight and basically just overwhelm him in melee in general. But Zintler's Reiksguard are going to be a problem for my Cold One Knights, and he's actually had them ambushed, and he's going to try to get a nice charge in there. He has a pretty crappy front line here, which is exactly what you'd expect. Swordsman, Spearman, Balthasar Gelt to buff him up. And yeah, he's basically conceding the infantry fight. He's not too worried about it. He's just going to use them to tie down enemy melee troops and let the Reiksguard and his Demigryph Knights with halberds do the dirty work. So the Royal Altdorf Griffites are here. They cause terror. Incredible stat line. Not as good as they were in Total War Warhammer 1, but they're still really solid. And then some Outriders with grenade launchers to give them some more mobility and some ability to shoot down those Dark Elf infantry from range. So out on this side, Zintler's Reiksguard are going to spring their ambush and get a beautiful charge directly into the Cold One Knights. And I've been caught out here. This was simply not a good engagement from me. I should have realized that he was going to have something Vanguard deployed or ambushed out on this flank. Although this might actually be outside the deployment zone. Zintler's Reiksguard do have Vanguard deployment. But yeah, so these Cold One Knights are going to get Plague of Rust. And that, I mean, their stat line is going to make them more than a challenge for Cold One Knights. And with that minus 60 armor down to 30 now, and Pistoliers firing into the flank, these Cold One Knights are going to get absolutely shish kebabbed in melee, and it's going to be a complete joke of a fight. I might take them down to about half HP, but it's not going to be a good trade for me at all, and I'm going to then try to help reinforce with some more Cold One Knights out to that flank. Now, when I was talking about mind games for the Empire, there is a really fun mind game you can do with them, right? Because most people expect you to go very heavy on the cavalry and very heavy on the skirmish cav. So one of the things you can do with the Empire is actually go greatsword heavy as a core and try to overwhelm them in an infantry fight, because a lot of the time people will go maybe only some dread spears, some bleak swords, and maybe a couple witch elves, and then greatswords will trade really well in an infantry fight and kind of overwhelm them that way. So it hasn't happened here, and I'm feeling fairly confident with my build with the 4 Cold One Knights. I think I can trade well in a cav fight, but this is not a good start out on that flank. We do have Malekith the Witch King with Soul Stealer, and of course Balthasar Gelt does have Final Transmutation, and he also has a Witch Hunter for some of those accuses as well. So let's get the actual battle started now. Press play, and you can see that I'm pushing up really heavily to try to engage the Empire at the moment. So the Cold One Knights are going to charge forward here, and I want to get a rear charge into the Spearmen. I've got my Cold One Knights shifting out there to deal with the Zintler's Reiksguard, and my Sisters of Slaughter are perfect for running down the Spearmen, and I will be able to engage, and I mean, this is just going to be a raffle stomp in melee. But again, this is not really the important thing, right? Like, the Empire is just there, their infantry is literally just there to hold for as long as physically possible, while the Empire Knights and the Reiksguard and the Demigryphs do all the killing. So I charge in here to try to get the Spearmen to stop running away from me, and I'm going to disengage, but he's going to get a really good charge off, do quite a bit of damage to my Cold One Knights here, and his Royal Altdorf Griffites, supported by the Warrior Priest and all those buffs, will also go into melee as well. They're going to run over the Sisters of Slaughter, no question, but I do have Dread Spears, and I do have my Knights of the Ebon Claw ready to kind of move around the flank and charge into the back of the army there. Malekith has taken some damage from an Accused from the Witch Hunter, and he's charging into melee, and we've got a bunch of Executioners now into a good engagement all across the line. Witch Elves in there as well, and they're going to absolutely shred through these swordsmen who are already out of control, already down to half HP. They're getting absolutely destroyed. Out on this side, Cold One Knights are going to catch up to the Zintler's Reiksguard, and we're going to do a lot of damage right there. But I want to focus on this engagement here. So I got the Accuse on Malekith. I'll pop a Soul Stealer on top of the Royal Altdorf Griffites and the Reiksguard to get him back up to full HP. And that is probably one of the best ways for the Dark Elves to counter what the Empire is trying to do if they decide to go Gelt. Final Transmutation is incredibly strong right now, but anytime that gets casted on you, you can just pop a Soul Stealer on a big blob of enemy characters or cavalry, and you'll go back up to full HP. So I've already gotten him back up to full there, and I should be able to get at least one more cast this game of that if that's required. But my Knights of the Ebon Claw have charged into the flank of the Royal Altdorf Griffites, and this is a perfect engagement for them. They didn't get their charge off into my cav because they were already engaged, and even though the Warrior Priest is there and he gives some really nice buffs and some really good damage resistance auras, Royal Altdorf Griffites getting absolutely stomped by the Knights of the Ebon Claw here, and I can charge forward and continue putting pressure on the Reiksguard and everything else. So even with a Plague of Rust going down, even with some debuffs, we can pretty much crush this melee engagement on this side, even though it is a little bit blobby you can see that Murderous Prowess has popped, and this is really just an engagement that I want. You're like, yes, it's blob, but I've got local superiority, and Gelt doesn't have a really great way of punishing that. I mean, Searing Doom can hurt the infantry. It's really good against Sisters of Slaughter and some of the infantry, but against my cav, really won't do a whole lot. And with Word of Pain down the Reiksguard, they have to disengage. I mean, if they stay there, Knights of the Ebon Claw will punish them super heavily. So I want to push my advantage here, try to overwhelm the right flank and then get into his rear. And you can see that his line is already buckled here. I can get my Witch Elves through and get directly into the back of the Spearmen. Reiksguard are going to get some charges into the Witch Elves, which will not be ideal, but that's fine. So again, one of the ways that the Empire, though, counters the Dark Elves in a cavalry fight is Malekith doesn't really have great ways of buffing his own cavalry. He kind of relies on Word of Pain and Soul Stealer, and both those are kind of high winds and magic spells. As we get a nice little explosion off there in the distance. But yeah, Gelt and some of the other, certainly the Archlector for the Empire, can buff up their cavalry super well. So they can either Plague of Rust debuff enemy cav, or they can Glittering Robe, or you can just roll the Archlector alongside the rest of your cavalry and really buff them up substantially that way. So Malekith is really good alongside his Dreadknights, but he's not necessarily the best for completely buffing them or debuffing an enemy cavalry battle line. So we're overwhelming the right flank here, and of course the infantry is crumbling substantially. This is what you would expect with the Empire. They're just there to hold. They're not going to do a lot of killing. They're not going to survive against executioners or anything like that. But with the infantry line starting to break, he's still got the cavalry. I mean, he took a lot of damage on his Royal Altogryphites. Out here, we actually still have Cold One Knights and Zintlar's Reiksguard fighting it out. And it looks like the Cold One Knights might end up pulling that one out, but barely. But I mean, Zintlar's Reiksguard literally killed 2 full units of Cold One Knights there. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that the Empire Cavalry can trade pretty well with the Dark Elves. But you're not necessarily bringing all that cav with the Dark Elves to win the cav fight, even though they can. You're doing it more to mitigate the damage output of their cavalry. Because if they have cav in the mid to late stages of the game and you don't, and they have that mobility advantage, that is when you can really start getting crushed by the Empire. Because, I mean, Reiksguard charges into your rear, Sisters of Slaughter will get absolutely destroyed, Executioners will get run over. You're not going to bring Black Guard in this matchup, really. You don't need them. So you don't really have a lot of tools to deal with their cavalry if your cav's dead. Knights of the Ebon Claw are kicking ass, though, up to 43 kills right now, and he's reforming his battle line, and Gelt and the Warrior Priest are still alive. And we're going to basically just have to reform here, because I don't have a way of catching him at this point. I could try to make a push for the infantry that remains, but that stuff doesn't matter, right? And he's not going to commit. He's not going to just sit there and let them die. He's going to run away as well. So what he's doing instead is using these grenade launchers really well and using the Pistoliers in melee just to chase off these Dread Spears and kind of get rid of the meat shields and all that stuff. Grenade launchers are going to start wreaking a pretty terrible toll here. I mean, these grenade launchers are a bit of a niche pick. Like, they're not a troll unit at all, but they're not one that you're typically going to see in competitive multiplayer, but they can be really good if you've got the cavalry advantage here. And at this point, I don't know that he does, but I'd have no way of actually catching him, right? Because my Dreadknights are not going to be fast enough to catch his Reiksguard or his Royal Altogryphites or his Pistoliers. So I'm going to have to kind of just weather the storm for a minute here as he tries to shift the balance bar back in his favor. And, I mean, he's going to get some good shots with the Pistoliers. And shooting into the Sisters of Slaughter, I mean, he's going to do a lot of damage. They have physical resistance for sure. They do have the missile block chance, but, I mean, if he can destroy my Executioners with the grenade launchers and get rid of some of my infantry, you can definitely bring this one back in his favor. And he still has Final Transmutation on Gelt as well, which will be really good for debuffing or hurting my Knights of the Ebon Claw and hurting Malekith as well. So Searing Doom coming down. Oh, my Sisters of Slaughter on the right flank. They're going to move up and dodge that. And we'll take a look at how he's kind of setting up his engagement right now. He is beginning to surround me and encircle me and think about maybe trying to run me over. But he's got a lot of ammo left on these Outriders grenade launchers, and they're up to 20 kills right now, and they're going to be able to continue to push that advantage for sure. Pistoliers getting a good charge in here. They have pretty crappy melee stats, but at the end of the day, they have impact damage. They do have some kind of charge bonus. So every time he charges in and quickly disengages, it should go relatively well for him, unless they get stuck. In which case, they're going to die pretty horribly, and that's what happened right there. So he lost some models for sure, but they're out of ammo. They've already done exactly what they were supposed to do, which was whittle down my cold ones and help him win the cav fight. So if you get all your Pistoliers to fire all their ammo, it's pretty good for you. And they've got some pretty decent missile damage too. I mean, 38 missile damage is pretty good as well. So we're gonna kind of sit in the woods here for a second here as he shoots into us. He's gonna try to get some charges in, but very soon we're gonna decide to push out and try to bring these swordsmen and spearmen into the engagement and try to run them over and make him commit to a melee fight. He still has Gelt here. He hasn't done a whole lot this battle. I haven't seen a final transmutation go off, although it wouldn't surprise me if it has been used. But yeah, I think the Plague of Rust debuff, I mean, it's just so good. It's so cost effective in terms of Winds of Magic. It's a great way to turn any kind of engagement in your favor. And Sisters of Slaughter should be able to close the gap now and completely run over these swordsmen and spearmen. And once that happens, he's either going to have to completely run away and keep using those grenades, or he's going to have to actually commit to a melee fight. And he's going to commit now. Reiksguard charging in from the flank, into the Dread Spears, into the Witch Elves. That's very dangerous, though. That's why the Witch Elves are out on that flank. They can make sure that these Reiksguard rampage, and if they commit to a fight, they're going to die. I mean, they don't have a lot of health left. In the center here, we're going to get a Battle Prayer going down and a Soul Stealer on the Warrior Priest. And Malekith, again, should be able to suck up a lot of that health. It's one of the reasons why Morathi and Malekith are such strong lords. They can get their health back, and the Dark Elves don't have any healing except for that spell. But healing on a lord is really good, and it deals damage to enemies too. So that's why you almost always see that used on both Malekith and on the Hag Sorceress of Gron. We're pushing our advantage here. Executioner's breaking through the center. And the Knights of the Ebon Claw are continuing to push forward. Even though that Plague of Rust debuff is down, there's no real cav threat left on the field to really punish them heavily. And Royal Altar Gryphites are gone now. So we're going to just keep pushing the advantage. Maces flashing in the sunlight, running after these Outriders. And if they get zoned out, they can't really fire their grenades. They don't have Parthian shot. Out on this flank, Pistoliers being run over. And that will pretty much seal the deal here. There's not a whole lot the Empire can do. So again, a lot of tournament players I think will probably tell you that Dark Elves have maybe a slight advantage in this matchup, but there's a reason why you see people like Romulan Dog, even against really good players like Soothsayer, they will actually rock the Empire in that matchup because it can totally work. Gelt's gonna get rampaged here, and that means he's just gonna die as Executioner closes the gap and run him over. But yeah, the way the Empire wins this, I mean, it's very simple. It's use that missile cavalry to your advantage. It's use that cavalry advantage to your advantage. But when someone throws in a lot of Cold One Knights and Knights of the Ebon Claw and tries to match that, that's where the Empire might need to throw in some mind games there and think about committing heavier to a melee fight. And I believe when Romulan Dog and Soothsayer just played in Turn's last Flash tournament, I believe that's where the Empire actually went pretty heavy on the greatswords and did very well. I mean, the Dark Elves ended up almost losing that, although Soothsayer did pull that one out of the bag with the Dark Elves. But you can mind game your opponent there and commit heavier to a melee fight. And if they go kind of cheap on that front, only go Dread Spears and only go Sisters of Slaughter and Witch Elves, which is pretty common, then you can kind of push an advantage that way. But really, I do think this matchup mostly revolves around the mobility game, and that's why you saw both of us invest very heavily in cav. I didn't go any missile cav this game because I didn't really want to micro it, but he did, and the Pistoliers actually ended up doing very well. The Outriders did some work as well, but maybe a little bit too late for it to really shift things in their favor. I think if he had taken a better engagement with the Royal Altar Gryphites, he might have been able to pull that one out, although I don't know. It would have been tough. Playing against the Dark Elves is tough. Like, again, they're obviously the strongest faction in multiplayer right now. They could use a few nerfs here or there. I'm not sure how exactly I'd go about nerfing them. I mean, a big part of their success is honestly Murderous Prowess, and it pops every single game, and it always pops at a good time of the battle, too. It's really hard to kind of make that pop when things aren't engaged in melee. It's not like Greenskin WoW where you can kind of try to bait it out, because it always comes at a set time when a certain amount of kills happen, and those kills are only going to happen when you're in melee. So yeah, interesting game. It was a fun one. I actually played a bunch of games with Dov. I'll try to get some more with him too. He crushed me in a Norska versus Vampire Counts matchup when he played Vamps and I played Norska. Unfortunately, I watched it back, and it was one of those games where it was like so stompy that all I could have been talking about was builds. instead of like actual micro or any of the actual plays that were happening, because he just completely ran me over. So I'll think about showing that one, but I would like to get like a more interesting loss in that matchup to show how Norsca fares and how they can deal with Blood Knights, because Blood Knights are super strong right now, really effing good. But yeah, there's a lot of multiplayer content coming for sure, and there's also the tournament as well. So by the time this goes up, it'll probably be about like an hour and a half, 2 hours before the tournament goes live. Again, at 8 p.m. BST, 3 p.m. EST, and I believe like 9 CEST, Eastern European time, it will be going on. So on twitch.tv/Total War Official, Jonton, Gabo King, myself, and Lord Master of Sotek will be dueling it out and getting some really good multiplayer games in. So please come out and support, and I hope you guys enjoy. Indie Pride, signing out for now.